There is a very specific kind of loneliness that comes from standing in a room full of people who admire your husband in uniform. Everyone thanks him for his service. Everyone tells you how lucky you are. Everyone says, "He's such a great guy. You must be so proud." And you're standing there, smiling, nodding, holding your drinks, secretly wondering if any of them would believe you if they knew what happened behind closed doors. Not the public version, the private one. The one where you walk on eggshells from the moment you hear the key in the door. The one where you learn very quietly which moods are safe and which ones require you to disappear. The one where you can't tell people what's happening, not because you can't find the words, but because you already know what they're going to say. But he's so well respected. He serves the community. He would never. I know that room. I've stood in it more than once. And today's episode is for every military spouse, every law enforcement wife, every firefighter's partner, every correction officer's family member, every EMT spouse who's ever looked around a room full of people applauding their partner and felt completely, utterly, invisibly alone. I see you, I hear you, and you've been waiting for someone to say this out loud for a very long time. Welcome back to Pattern Breakers Collective. I'm Lisa. Before we get into today's episode, two important things. First, as usual, throughout this episode, I'll mostly use he when talking about the person causing harm. That reflects my own experience and the majority of the women that I happen to work with. But I recognize that abuse is not limited to one gender or one type of relationship. If your story looks different, the principles here still apply to you. Second, today's episode includes discussion of suicide and intimate partner abuse. I will not be sharing graphic details, but I know that these topics can be deeply activating. If at any point you feel overwhelmed, please pause, take care of yourself, and reach out to someone you trust or a mental health professional if you need to. Now, I've been asked to do this episode for a while. And I'll be honest, I've sat with it, thought about how much to share, and decided that today it's time to say it. Because here's what I know from both personal and professional experience. When abuse happens inside a military or first responder relationship, the dynamics surrounding it, the culture, the hierarchy, the community, the identity, create barriers that most conversations about domestic violence don't address. Survivors in these relationships often say the same thing. Nobody understands what this was actually like. And I want to be clear from the start. This is not an attack on the military, on law enforcement, on firefighters, EMTs, dispatchers, or corrections officers. I know extraordinary people in every one of these professions. I work with them daily. The profession is not the problem. The uniform is not the problem. But when abuse does happen inside these relationships, and it does more often than you would imagine, the barriers to recognizing it, leaving safely, and being believed are often very different. They are specific and they deserve their own conversation. This is that conversation. I want to start by telling you something that I think matters to how you hear the rest of this episode. I served in the military myself. I'm not someone who married into this culture from the outside and learned it secondhand. I was inside of it. I understood the chain of command. I understood what rank meant and how it functioned. I understood the culture of loyalty, the deference to authority, the unspoken rules about what you raise and what you don't, what you address and what you absorb. I understood what the institution was built to do and what it was built to protect. And I understood, even at a very young age, what a military police officer's relation to a service weapon meant. What was required to be issued one, what should be required to keep one. I tell you this because it matters to what I'm about to share. When I encountered what I encountered, I wasn't naive about what it meant. I wasn't unfamiliar with how these systems work. I had been inside them, which made what happened next all the more impossible to reconcile. Years ago, I was married to the biological father of my 2 children. He was in the military. He was a military police officer. And like so many young military spouses, and like someone who had served herself and believed in the institution, I believed we were building something, a life, a family, a future inside of a world I knew and understood. Underneath that picture, things were happening that I didn't have full words for yet. There was manipulation, there were lies, extensive, long-running lies that had been operating beneath the surface of our life together for longer than I had known. There was a version of reality being presented to the world, to the unit, to everyone around us that was very different from the one I was living inside. And then everything came to light. When I finally understood the scope of what had been happening, how deep it went, how long it had been running, he attempted suicide instead of taking accountability. I was the one who found him. I want to stay here for a moment because I think people don't talk enough about what that does to a person, not to him, to the person who finds them. Your nervous system doesn't ask your permission in those moments. You don't think, you act. You do what needs to be done because you have 2 small children in another part of the house and someone in front of you whose life is in immediate danger. And some part of your brain just takes over. And then the immediate crisis passes. And you're left holding something that nobody prepared you for. Fear, guilt, grief, fury, love that doesn't know how to exit. Relief that he survived, tangled up with a rage at being put in that position of saving someone who had been quietly destroying your life. Trauma that, whether you name it that day or not, is going to be inside of you for a very long time. I remember thinking in the days that followed, surely everything is going to change now. Surely this is the moment that breaks through. Surely the institution, the one that I had served in, the one that I understood, the one built on structure and accountability and chain of command, would recognize the weight of what had just happened. Within days, he was back at work, armed. I need you to sit with that for a moment because I need you to understand what it meant. His job in the military was a military police officer, which means his service weapon was not incidental. It was central. And I had served. I understood what the protocols around service weapons required. I understood what a suicide attempt meant in terms of fitness for duty, what it should have meant. I was not a young civilian wife who didn't know how these things worked. I knew exactly how they were supposed to work. And watching him manipulate the system to return to duty, armed, within days of what I had witnessed, it wasn't just fear, though fear was absolutely there. It was the sickening clarity that the information I held, the reality I had been living and had now watched reach a crisis point, had not fully crossed into the decision-making happening at his unit. I was invisible to the system. Not because the system didn't care. I don't want to overstate this. I know individuals within these institutions who take these situations with complete seriousness. But systems can only respond to what they know. And what they knew about him was his service record, his performance evaluations, his standing within the unit. What they did not know fully, what I had been carrying alone, was everything else. The spouse standing quietly in the background, holding the true version of who this person was at home, often exists in a category the system doesn't have a clear form for. And I cannot tell you how alone that felt. Not because I expected anyone to fix my marriage, but because I had served in this institution. I had trusted it. And in that moment, it showed me exactly where its limits were. I left, not because leaving was easy. I had 2 very young children and I was navigating the complete dismantling of the life I had built, but because staying no longer felt survivable. And I knew with the clarity that sometimes only crisis can produce that I could not wait any longer. And then came the other thing I didn't expect, the thing that hurt in a completely different way. After everything after the discovery, the suicide attempt, the realization of what had been happening in our life, the decision to leave, I started hearing something from people who loved me, not from his community, but from my own family. Oh, but he's such a good dad, and the kids need their father. I want to talk about that phrase because I have heard versions of it from so many women that I know it isn't unique to my experience, and it needs to be named for what it is. He's such a good dad is meant usually with genuine love. The people who said it to me were not trying to hurt me. They weren't minimizing what had happened. They believed that they were giving me something useful, a reason to consider, a counterweight to put on the scale. But here's what it actually communicated. It communicated that his relationship with our children was more legible to the people around us than what I had lived through. The visible, public version of him, the one who showed up to the events, who played with the kids at the family gathering, who received the warmth and approval of everyone around him. That version was real to them, concrete, something that they could point to. My experience was not as visible. And so, when those two things were placed on the scale, the one everyone else could see won. And I want to say something to every woman who has heard some version of this after leaving or trying to leave. Someone being a present and loving parent is real. It can coexist with being genuinely harmful to a partner. Children can adore a father who was destructive to their mother. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. The presence of one does not cancel out the reality of the other. Just because he looks like a good dad does not make him a good partner. He's such a good dad is not evidence that you were wrong about what happened in your marriage. It is evidence that people find it easier to believe what they can see than what they can't. And for those of us whose experiences primarily happened in private, in the emotional space between two people and a slow erosion of self that no one else is watching, that asymmetry is one of the most isolating parts of the entire experience. Being gaslit by the person who hurt you is one kind of wound. Being gaslit by the people who love you is completely other. Both deserve to be named, and neither means that you were wrong about your own life. Years later, I found myself in another relationship, another military relationship. Different person, genuinely, different circumstances, different story entirely on the surface. But at some point, and I remember the specific moment when I felt it, this cold, clear recognition in my chest, I realized that the details were different, but the pattern wasn't. Walking on eggshells, explaining away behavior that made me deeply uncomfortable, spending so much energy trying to understand him to manage the emotional climate of our life that I had almost completely stopped understanding myself. And I wasn't new to this work by then. I'd been studying these dynamics. I sat with survivors. I thought I knew what to look for, and I still didn't see it clearly for longer than I want to admit. I share this because I think women need to hear it. The culture creates a particular kind of fog. The loyalty you're expected to demonstrate, the identity that you've built inside that world, the deep-seated conditioning absorbed from the culture around you that says, you support the mission, you don't complain, you hold it together, you are strong. All of that makes the fog thicker. All of that makes it easier to explain things away. All of that makes it harder to say, even to yourself, even in the privacy of your own thoughts, this is not okay. Even people who study these patterns for a living can find themselves inside one. The fog is not a sign of stupidity. It's a sign of how effectively these dynamics operate and how much the culture around them can reinforce the silence. One of the cruelest mechanics of abuse inside these relationships is the way public identity functions as a shield. Your reality is constantly, relentlessly competing with everyone else's perception. They see the public version, the one at the department picnic, the unit ceremony, the community event, the one that gets thanked, applauded, called a hero. You know the private version, the one that comes through the door with a specific kind of energy that you learn to read before he says a word, the one that exists in the silences and the calculations you run before you speak. I've had women tell me I couldn't tell anyone because everybody loved him. His coworkers would never believe me. I felt like telling the truth was a betrayal of his career. That last one deserves examination. She doesn't just worry about not being believed. She has absorbed the idea that her truth is dangerous to him, to his livelihood, his reputation, to the people who depend on him. She has been positioned, consciously or not, as someone who protects his image even when that image is used against her. Think about what that means in each of these communities specifically. Like in law enforcement, the judge may know him, the dispatcher who received your call may be his colleague, the officer who responds may consider him a brother, the DA may know him personally. The community has already formed a view of who he is, and you're the one making a claim against it. The institutional calculus in that moment rarely favors you. You know that going in, and knowing it changes whether or not you pick up the phone. In the military, the chain of command runs through the institution that is also your housing, your healthcare, sometimes your visa status. Your children's school is on that base. Your friendships exist inside of that community. Leaving the relationship doesn't mean leaving one person. It can mean leaving the entire structure of your life and sometimes even your country. In fire, corrections, EMS, small departments, everyone knows everyone. The brotherhood, and it is genuinely that, a bond built through shared danger, creates a loyalty culture that is beautiful in context and devastating when it functions to protect someone who hurts the people he comes home to. This is the specific trap. The entire social and institutional infrastructure of your life is built around the public version of this person. Dismantling one means dismantling the other. And that requires a different kind of courage than most survivor narratives describe, because most survivor narratives don't have to account for losing your housing, your healthcare, your community, your children's school, and your sense of identity simultaneously. I want to talk about something that gets overlooked in almost every conversation about abuse in these communities. Not what the abusive person does, but what the culture around him asks of you. Military wives are taught to be resilient, adaptable, self-sufficient, to support the mission, to hold the household together during deployments without complaint, to manage their own fear and the children's fear and the uncertainty of a life that moves constantly without burdening him when he's in the field, without making her needs the priority during operational periods. Police wives learn to absorb, to not ask too many questions about what he saw, to manage the household alone during impossible shifts, to be the stable one because he carries enough just getting through the day. These are not character flaws in the women who develop these traits. They are adaptive responses to a genuinely demanding environment. They come from love and commitment and a real understanding of what the job requires. But here's what I need to name clearly. Resilient, adaptable, self-sufficient, don't complain, support the mission, hold everything together. Those are also the exact words that describe self-abandonment. When the culture has already trained you to suppress your own needs, to see your emotional requirements as secondary to operational demands, to push through discomfort as a matter of identity, an abusive partner doesn't have to work very hard. The groundwork has already been laid. You already believe on some level that your needs are things to manage rather than things that deserve to be met. You didn't sign up for abuse, but the culture gave you exactly the coping strategies that make abuse easier to survive and harder to name. And that is not a coincidence. It is the environment working exactly as it was designed to do, just in a context it was never meant for. Now, before we go further, I need to say something clearly because I think it is one of the most important distinctions in this entire conversation. PTSD is not the same thing as coercive control. Trauma is not the same thing as abuse. Being emotionally shut down after witnessing things most people will never see is not the same thing as deliberately making your partner afraid of you. Many of the people who serve in these professions carry real, significant psychological weight. They see trauma. They make impossible decisions. They come home changed. That deserves compassion, treatment, and support for them and for the families who love them. And understanding why someone behaves a certain way does not require you to accept behavior that harms you. Full compassion for someone's trauma history can coexist with the recognition that certain things happening in your home are not okay. One does not cancel out the other. Where I see survivors get hurt is when the explanation becomes permanent cover. When, oh, but he's been through so much, becomes the ceiling of the conversation indefinitely. When legitimate occupational stress is used, sometimes by others, sometimes by the survivor herself, to explain away what is actually coercive control. The traits that make someone excellent in crisis, hypervigilance, the need for control, black and white thinking, emotional compartmentalization, authority as default setting, can become amplified at home in ways that are genuinely damaging, especially in someone who already has controlling tendencies. That is not an excuse. It is context, and context does not obligate you to absorb harm. Now, can we talk about one of the most harmful phrases said to people in these relationships? You knew what you signed up for. 7 words meant to end the conversation, to remind you that you chose this, that your discomfort was disclosed in advance. And here's what I want to say about that. Yes, you knew there would be deployments, shift work, missed holidays, unexpected calls, danger that came with the job. You understood the irregular schedule. You accepted that the birthday might be missed, that you would carry more than your share when he wasn't there. Those are the realities of the profession. You signed up for those things with open eyes, knowingly, out of love. You did not sign up to be controlled. You did not sign up to have your finances monitored and your access to money restricted. You did not sign up to be screamed at in a way that made your children go silent in the next room. You did not sign up to be told that your perception of your own life isn't accurate. You did not sign up to feel afraid in your own home. You did not sign up to be slowly isolated from every person who knew you before this relationship. No job title, no uniform, no amount of public service, however genuine and admirable, changes what you agreed to when you said yes to this relationship. His service can be real and worthy of respect. And what happened to you can be real and worthy of recognition. You do not have to choose between honoring one and telling the truth about the other. They are not mutually exclusive. The world has been asking you to act as though they are. They are not. You are not disloyal for telling the truth. Abuse thrives in silence, and the specific silence inside military and first responder communities has been purchased with exactly this phrase. You knew what you signed up for. You signed up for a partnership. You did not sign up for harm, period. Let me get specific about what actually to do because these circumstances require specific guidance. First, find someone who actually understands this world. A therapist who doesn't understand coercive control or military or first responder contexts may inadvertently send you back in with communication strategies that won't work or that will make things more dangerous. Look specifically for advocates who understand domestic violence in these communities. The National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 can help direct you. Military One Source at 1-800-342-0647 has resources specifically for military families. You are also allowed to ask any professional directly, do you have experience with coercive control in military or first responder relationships? You are allowed to interview the people who help you. Next, document everything: dates, times, what was said, what happened, screenshots of messages, financial records you can access. Gaslighting makes us forget. That is part of how it works. Documentation returns you to what's real. Keep it somewhere he cannot access. Even if you never show it to anyone, you need a record that belongs to you alone. Then, know what you're entitled to. Military benefits, housing, healthcare, support through divorce, these are complicated, and the complexity is often used against spouses who don't know their own rights. Find a legal advocate who understands military family law specifically. This information belongs to you. Having it is not betrayal, it is preparation. Then build connection outside of the community. The isolation of having your entire social world inside the same community as the person harming you is one of the most powerful control mechanisms in these relationships. Finding even one person outside of that world, a family member, an old friend, an advocate, a therapist, breaks the isolation just enough to let some reality in. You don't have to rebuild an entire network. You only need one thread. Finally, stop asking how to help him change. Start asking what you need to be safe. These are different questions and they lead in genuinely different directions. One keeps your energy centered on him. One brings it back to you. That shift from how do I fix this to what do I need is often where everything else begins. Before I close, I want to speak directly to the men and women listening who serve. If you are someone who comes home and treats your family with love and respect and genuine care, this episode is not about you. I mean that completely. I know extraordinary people in every one of these professions. People of profound integrity. People who would be horrified by what I've described today. This episode exists because when abuse does happen inside these relationships, the specific barriers surrounding it deserve to be named. The survivors deserve to have their reality acknowledged, not just as domestic violence survivors in a generic sense, but as people navigating something with its own specific texture and its own specific difficulty. And if you are someone who serves and recognizes something in today's episode, not in your partner's behavior, but in your own, I want to say something directly to you. The traits that make you exceptional at the job can, under certain conditions, become harmful at home. That is not an accusation. It is an invitation to look honestly at what you carry through your front door. Many people in these professions have done that work and become better partners because of it. That path is always available to you. Now I want to close by speaking directly to the woman who asked me to make this episode and to every woman who recognized herself somewhere in today's conversation. I know the specific weight of that room, the one where everyone applauds the man standing next to you while you hold something inside your chest that you have no safe place to put down. I know what it's like to wonder whether your own reality is real because the version of it that exists in the room around you looks so completely different from the one you live inside. I know what it's like to be told by people who love you that the reason to go back is standing right in front of you in the form of children who need their father. I know how much weight that carries and how impossible it makes an already impossible situation. I know what it's like to protect his reputation while your own story goes untold. I know what it's like to have served in the institution yourself, to have trusted it, and to discover that that trust had limits you never anticipated. So let me be as clear as I know how to be. The uniform can deserve respect, and your story can deserve to be heard. Those two things are not in competition. They never were. The world told you to act as though they were. That was the lie. You do not have to choose between honoring someone's service and telling the truth about what happened inside of your home. Those are not the same thing. They never were. Abuse thrives in silence, and the silence inside these specific communities has been the most costly kind because it has been reinforced by loyalty, by culture, by institutions, by family, by the very identity that was supposed to protect people. If today's episode gave you language for something that you've been carrying without a name, please share it. Not just with people already in this community, with the military spouse you know who says she's always fine, with the police wife who hasn't called her mom in months, with the woman who keeps saying she just needs to understand him better. And if you haven't left a review wherever you listen, please do. It helps other women find this space when they're searching for something that they can't quite put into words yet. Until next time, the uniform tells you what someone does. It does not tell you what happens inside of their home. And if you've spent years believing that protecting someone else's image mattered more than your own peace, I hope today is the day you start to question that. Keep breaking every pattern that was never yours to carry.